Order in the court. The words crashed like a thunderclap through the high-ceiling chamber, bouncing off the oak-paneled walls, and settling over the room like a heavy blanket. But no one moved. No one breathed. The tension in the courtroom was electric. Harsh, humming, nearly strangling. Cameras snapped in swift bursts, their staccato beat as news photographers sought to freeze each twitch, each flicker of feeling. Pens scratched over notepads as reporters leaned forward, determined to catch every word. Two rows of Browns sat in sharp opposition, one behind Cody, one behind Christine, like two armies on a battlefield. They were not merely spectators. They were witnesses to a war that had been brewing for years. Christine Brown took center stage, flanked by the shiny wooden witness box. She didn't squirm. She didn't brush away tears. Her hands lay lightly on the polished rail in front of her. If she was nervous, she didn't let it show. This was the woman millions of fans of Sister Wives remembered as the heart of the family, the woman who laughed readily, prepared huge dinners, and attempted to talk sense into every argument. But the woman standing before them today wasn't that Christine. This was a Christine tempered in fire, hardened by betrayal, and no longer willing to remain quiet. Cody Brown sat at the defendant's table, mere feet away. He did not crack a smile. Gone was the golden boy charm that once made him the focal point of a reality television dynasty. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on Christine, with a glare of equal parts disbelief and outrage. Between them, tension hung in the air. Decades of shared life, love, children, secrets. Cody's lawyer, a lean, sharp-jawed man in a high-priced charcoal suit, stood up slowly from his chair. He walked with the sort of measured assurance that informed the jury he already figured he'd won. He came to the witness stand, his high-shine shoes tapping out slow, measured beats on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was chilly, bordering on silky. "Mrs. Brown, do you have evidence? Evidence you've been keeping secret, that can ruin my client's career and fortune?" A hush spread through the gallery. A person in the back whispered, "Evidence? What evidence?" before being hushed. Christine didn't blink. She shifted her head, ever so slightly, and met Cody's gaze. It was a look heavy with years of repressed pain, the unspoken sorrow of seeing him move towards Robin at the expense of the rest of the family, the pain of broken vows, the constant minor wounds of favoritism and disregard. For an instant the room's din seemed to recede. The only two people there, the man who had promised once that he'd love her, protect her, and the woman he had assumed would never go against him. Her mouth opened, and she spoke in a voice so calm it caused the hairs on the backs of people's necks to stand up. "Yes." The one word fell into the silence like a rock into quiet water. The ripple was immediate. Gasps were released. Janelle, sitting just behind Christine, automatically brought her hand up to her lips. Her eyes were wide and questioning Christine's face for explanations. Across the aisle, Robin's face paled. She sat rigid, fingers knotting together in her lap. The fingers of the court reporter danced across the stenograph machine, attempting to keep pace as the judge rapped his gavel for quiet. The attorney raised his eyebrows in expectation that Christine would falter or recant. Instead, she pressed forward, her eyes unblinking. "And not only any evidence," she pressed on, her voice traveling around the room. "Evidence that demonstrates Cody Brown has lied to this court, and to this family." The judge cocked his head to the side, intrigued now. He looked over at Cody, whose shoulders jerked like a man preparing to get hit. Newsmen in the front row wrote furiously. A camera operator zoomed in tight on Christine's face, capturing the steel in her gaze. This was no ordinary testimony. This was the type that made a trial explode into a media firestorm. The lawyer cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Mrs. Brown, what are you alleging, precisely?" Christine didn't respond immediately. She let the silence breathe, let the tension wind tighter and tighter until the whole room leaned in without knowing it. When she did speak, her voice was gentle but unmissably pointed. "I'm accusing," she continued, "Cody Brown of concealing money, faking signatures, and intimidating the individuals who had the nerve to challenge him." A stunned silence fell over the room. The lawyer's calm facade slid for the first time. "Mrs. Brown, do you realize the gravity of such an accusation?" Christine locked eyes with him, unwavering. I know it better than anyone. From the rear of the courtroom, a cry rang out. Liar! The bailiff sprang forward to restore order. But it was too late. Tension had turned to chaos. The judge's gavel came down again, his voice thundering. One more disruption, and I will clear this courtroom. Christine drew a slow, deliberate breath. She wasn't going to be shaken. She had spent years keeping her mouth shut, swallowing the truth because it was best for the family. Those days were done. Her gaze returned to Cody. For one moment, 1,000 memories spun between them. The day they wed, the delivery of their children, the late-night conversations, when she still trusted him. But now there was nothing but a battlefield left, and she was not backing down. I have evidence, she said at last. And when I lay it before them, this court will understand exactly what kind of person Cody Brown is. A low gasp swept through the gallery. The judge sat forward, as if even he couldn't wait to hear what was coming. But before Christine could speak another word, the attorney cut in. Your Honor, I'd like an immediate sidebar before my client's reputation is further blasted by unsubstantiated allegations. The judge paused, then nodded. The attorneys moved to the bench, their whispers strained and urgent. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching Christine and Cody with the intensity of watching the denouement of a drama they hadn't realized they'd enrolled in. Janelle leaned forward, putting a comforting hand on Christine's shoulder. Christine didn't turn around. Her gaze never wavered from Cody's. And in that wordless interchange, something unspoken was communicated between them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was the understanding that, regardless of what the judge decided in the next 5 minutes, the truth was already a time bomb waiting to go off. And Christine held the trigger. Somewhere in the back corner of the room, a journalist whispered to his friend, this trial just broke wide open as the biggest story of the year. They had no concept. The actual surprise hadn't even arrived yet. In order to know why Christine Brown stood in that courtroom, facing down the man who was once her husband, you had to look back. Not months, not years, but decades. All the way back to when she entered a family that, on the outside, appeared to be a kingdom united, but really was constructed on glass as thin as threads. Christine entered Cody Brown's plural marriage in 1994, the third wife in an already unorthodox household by most definitions. For years she performed her role flawlessly. She smiled through the uncomfortable times. She shared meals, shared tasks, shared aspirations. She believed in the concept of family, in the covenant that they all professed with one another, and with God. But things have a habit of shattering when the real world continues to hit them, repeatedly. The cracks began small. A diversion of Cody's attention, a missed chat here, a forgotten birthday there. Then the favoritism, quiet at the beginning, but inescapable once you noticed. Robin, the newest wife, was the sun that Cody circled. The rest of them, planets being gradually pushed into the cold. Christine swallowed her pain for years. She reminded herself it wasn't worth picking a fight about. She reminded herself the children were first. But the truth? She had started keeping mental scores. Small red flags she stuffed away in her mind. And then, in late 2021, just a few months after she had made the painful choice to leave Cody, a whisper of gossip reached her ears. It was from someone who wasn't capable of lying. An old family friend who used to do some of the Brown family's paperwork. Sipping coffee, they spoke in a confidential tone, and said the words that tied Christine's stomach in a knot. Christine, you know Cody sold that land, right? The Coyote Pass property. And he didn't divide it the way he said he would. Christine stiffened. That ground had been the fantasy. Each wife had been promised they'd receive their half, a decent chunk of the future. She had wanted to construct there once, prior to the divorce, meaning he didn't divide it. Christine probed. The friend paused, then spoke softly. He transferred the money, placed it in an undisclosed location, somewhere only he and Robin get to touch. Christine didn't want to believe it, not because she suspected Cody was capable of such a deed, but because she realized if it was true, it would mean he had been deceiving all of them for years. She sat in her kitchen table, late into the night, after the children had gone to bed. Bills laid out before her, bank statements, old emails, She began to see things she had previously overlooked: suspicious transactions, missing records. At midnight, she made a call that would alter everything. She called a private investigator. The name of the investigator was Marcus Hale, a reserved, detail-oriented guy, with a talent for uncovering things people didn't want uncovered. When Christine first encountered him, she was uncomfortable. She wasn't a spy on your ex type of woman. But Marcus gazed at her and spoke something she never forgot. If he's clean, you'll have peace of mind. If he's not, you'll have the truth. Either way, you win. She hired him, and Marcus began digging. It started with numbers and dates at first. But numbers tell tales if you know the code. And Marcus knew. In less than a month, he discovered it. A bank account in the name of RB Family Holdings. Robin Brown's initials. The figure? More than $480,000. Christine felt as though she had been punched. She knew what that money was. It was the joint assets, the land sales, the income from the family's public appearances. Money that was meant to be shared. Marcus didn't stop. He drew up property records. That's when the bombshell hit. Not only had Cody routed funds into the secret account, but he had signed property transfer papers using a not his own, not Christine's, but very similar-looking signature. This is forgery, Marcus explained matter-of-factly, laying out the papers on the table. And if it involves profit, it's fraud. Christine gazed at her own forged signature, her head reeling. How long had this all been happening? How many transactions had she been unwittingly a part of? She believed that was the worst of it. She was mistaken. 2 weeks later, Marcus came to her door, bearing a small black USB drive. Discovered this tracing a paper trail, he explained. It was stuck in a box of old files related to one of Cody's storage spaces. You should read what's on it. That evening, Christine inserted it into her laptop by herself in the dark. What she discovered almost made her ill. There were hours of sound recordings. Cody's voice, occasionally careless, sometimes furious, discussing with Robin, keeping the others in line. He ridiculed the other wives, joked over their unsound business sense, and worst of all, confessed outright to fiddling with money. One recording caused her to hold the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. If they don't like what I provide them, tough luck. They all signed on. And if they didn't, well, it will appear as though they did. Christine remained seated for a very long time after the file concluded, her head racing with equal measures of anger and sorrow. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the years she'd thought they were all in it together. About the loyalty she'd given so freely, to be used as disposable. For once in a very long time, Christine didn't feel helpless. She had evidence. Evidence that could destroy Cody's carefully built facade. But evidence is dangerous. One evening, weeks after she found the USB, Christine returned home to find an envelope wedged into her front door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a message scrawled in Cody's unmistakable handwriting. Stop what you're doing. Think about your kids. This will ruin them. And you. She sat on her kitchen counter, gazing at the note until the words ran together. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. She considered burning it, acting like she'd never laid eyes on it. But then she remembered the years she'd already lost to silence. She folded the letter neatly, put it in a Ziploc bag, and fit it into her desk drawer, alongside the USB, because Christine Brown had set her mind to it. The next time she laid eyes on Cody Brown, it would not be over a family dinner table. It would be in a courtroom. There was a single murmur of the courtroom air conditioning, for a brief moment, a low whir of machinery, that sounded almost too placid for what was to come. Christine sat rigidly in the witness box, her fingers folded delicately, but anyone who had a clue about her could recognize the barely perceptible signs, the tension in her shoulders, the gesture of her thumb passing over her knuckles, that she was holding it all together by sheer determination. Cody sat across from her at the defense table, back in his chair, with a face that attempted to be relaxed, but ended up looking smug-cornered. His lawyer, Brian Vance, a man whose reputation for taking apart witnesses is such that it's said he can disassemble them, like they are novice chess players, straightened his tie and advanced. His voice was courteous enough to deceive strangers, but there was a bite to it that everyone present could detect. So Mrs. Brown, let's begin with this alleged USB drive you say you found. Christine did not flinch. It isn't so-called. It's real. And it includes tapes of Cody confessing to secreting away assets and doctoring documents. Vance smiled, as if he'd been hoping she would say that. And you think the court will believe you? A former wife with obvious personal motives just happened to discover this damning evidence following your breakup. Christine's attorney, Dana Mills, sprang up from her chair. Objection, counsel is raising a suggestion of motive without proving facts. The judge peered over his glasses. Sustained. Mr. Vance, be more careful in your wording. Vance nodded slightly, then faced Christine again. Okay, let's try again. Mrs. Brown, where did you get this USB drive? Christine's tone was serene, but beneath was the undertone of steel. It was inside a package of papers, associated with a storage facility Cody rented. My investigator discovered it while going through the contents. Vance cocked his head, pretending to be interested. Your investigator, admitting you hired a private investigator to pry into Mr. Brown's private life. Are you? I paid someone to check the facts. Christine responded calmly. When you're married to a person for years, sometimes the fact doesn't appear until you go looking for it. Cody fidgeted in his seat, his jaw clenched. He leaned forward and whispered to his attorney, never taking his eyes off of Christine. Vance stepped forward toward the witness stand. Mrs. Brown, do you know that tampering with or faking evidence is illegal? Christine's lips twisted, not in smiles, but in the sort of controlled rage that comes from recognizing you're on the verge of taking apart a lie. Yes, which is why I ensured the drive was dealt with by a certified forensic examiner prior to ever hearing it. Dana Mills rose again. Your Honor, we'd like to enter into evidence the official forensic report verifying the integrity of the USB. The bailiff took the document to the judge, who scanned it quickly before passing it along to the jury. Vance's smirk faltered. Mrs. Brown, he attempted to regain. You've drawn quite sensational portrait of my client, but maybe you're just misunderstanding what you heard on these supposed recordings. Out of context, private conversation is very easily misquoted. Christine's attorney rose to his feet. Your Honor, if the court would permit it, we'd like to play a clip from the USB so that the jury may judge for themselves. The judge sat back in his chair, regarding Cody for a moment before giving a slight nod. Proceed. Dana pushed a button on a tiny speaker. The courtroom was filled with Cody's voice, unmistakable and unfiltered. Robin will always come first. The others, they'll receive what I determine. And if they don't like it, too bad. They signed the papers, or at least, it appears they did. An audible gasp cut through the silence. In the jury box, a woman in her 40s shook her head slowly. A man in the second row leaned forward, his eyebrows raised. Robin Brown sat rigidly in the gallery, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. Vance cleared his throat, stepping toward the jury, as if he could explain it away. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand. But the judge interrupted him. Mr. Vance, you'll have your say. Dana hit play again. If they don't like what I provide for them, too bad. They all signed the documents. And if they didn't, well, it will appear that way. The room didn't gasp this time. It just fell silent. The sort of silence that happens when there's nothing left to pretend about. Vance squared his shoulders, taking a deep breath. Mrs. Brown, isn't it a fact that you and my client have had long-standing personal conflicts since your breakup? That you might, in point of fact, have a personal reason to tarnish his reputation? Christine didn't flinch from him. The truth tarnishes his reputation. I don't need to do anything else. Cody then finally spoke out of his own silence, his voice low and venomous. You're doing this because you hate me, Christine. Her eyes moved to him, steady and unshaken. No, Cody, I'm doing this because you stole from all of us. The jury visibly flinched. One juror wrote a note. Another folded her arms and glared at Cody with narrowed eyes. Dana stood once more, grabbing the opportunity. Your Honor, the tapes are just a fraction of the evidence. We have bank statements for movement of money from family accounts into an account with the name RB Family Holdings, one controlled by the defendant, and Robin Brown alone. She handed over the documents to the bailiff, who presented them to the judge and jurors. The judge overruled Vance, as he attempted to object. Christine's voice sliced through the air once more. Every cent that was put into that account was to be split between all of us. He promised it to us, and then he stashed it away. The attorney's plan was disintegrating, but he was not willing to give up. He shifted gears. Mrs. Brown, you say you discovered a letter from my client that you think was threatening. Do you have such a letter with you? Christine dug into a folder and extracted a clear plastic evidence sleeve. Between its folds, the paper showed Cody's handwriting in heavy black lines. If you open your mouth, you'll regret it. Think of your kids, Christine. This will destroy them. Vance scowled. How can we know that this letter wasn't forged by you? Dana was prepared. Because, Your Honor, handwriting analysis by a court-sanctioned expert established that it is 98% certain to be Mr. Brown's handwriting. The judge's eyes grew cold as he gazed at Cody. Cody changed his position again, but his face showed nothing. The jury had ceased writing notes. They were simply observing now. Observing Christine stand firm against a man who had once headed her world. The tension in the room was not just legal, it was personal. It was decades of history, love turning to betrayal, now exposed under the bright fluorescent lights of the courtroom. When Christine left the witness stand, the room collectively seemed to exhale. But the fight was far from done. For what Christine didn't realize yet was that Cody had one final card to play, and he was going to use it before the trial ended. The courtroom was abuzz like an overcharged circuit. The tape recordings, the bank records, the letter, it was enough to swing the case decisively in Christine's favor. But Cody Brown was not a man who folded. The instant the judge started calling the afternoon session back into order, there was something about Cody's stance, coiled tension, like an animal that had been pinned but still possessed claws. His attorney, Brian Vance, had the vapid grin of a magician who was on the verge of drawing a rabbit from a hat. Your Honor, Vance started in a calm tone. Prior to final arguments, the defense would like to produce new evidence that specifically calls into question the credibility of the witness, Christine Brown. The words fell like a boulder in the center of a pond. Christine's attorney bristled immediately. Objection, that is very irregular. The defense has had weeks to present evidence. Vance spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. The evidence only came into our hands yesterday evening. We acted to accept it as soon as it was authenticated. The judge leaned forward, obviously cautious but interested. What evidence? Vance motioned to the bailiff, who brought a manila envelope to the bench. The judge opened it, reading the contents with a furrowed brow, before handing it to the court clerk. Christine's gut clenched. She'd been around long enough to understand that surprises in court never played in favor of the truth. The clerk distributed copies to the jury. They leaned in, speaking softly to one another. Christine couldn't read the documents clearly, where she sat, but she caught a word in bold at the head of the page, email. She turned to him. His tone was falsely measured. Mrs. Brown, do you recognize this email correspondence? Christine looked down at the copy her attorney had just put on the table. Her eyes picked over the lines rapidly, her heart pounding in her ears. The emails seemed to be between her and Marcus Hale, the private investigator she'd hired, plotting how to make the recordings sound worse, and timing the release to cause maximum harm. Her jaw clenched. These are forged. Vance snapped. So you're saying you never sent these? Absolutely. That's not the way I write. And I never spoke about anything like that to Marcus. Vance's tone grew snappish. Interesting. Because these were pulled from Mr. Hale's home lab, which was subpoenaed and forensically searched by an independent lab. Christine's attorney stood up right away. Your Honor, we object. The origin of this alleged evidence is unknown, and since the defense has taken such a last-minute approach, fabrication is likely. The judge glared at them. We'll let the witness testify before making a ruling on admissibility. Christine's fingers clutched the lip of the witness stand. She stared straight at the jury. I have no idea where these came from, but I can tell you this. They are not mine. I have been under oath since day one. If I wanted to hurt Cody, I could have gone to the newspapers months ago. I came here because this is the place where the truth counts. Vance's smile never wavered. Of course it's up to the jury to determine if the truth is more important than personal revenge. He left the words suspended there before continuing. Now Mrs. Brown,
You previously testified about a letter you said Mr. Brown had written to threaten you. What if I were to tell you there's a second letter, written in your handwriting, and one that tells a story quite different from yours? Christine's lawyer shot her a quick glance. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. She had no idea what he was talking about. The bailiff handed over another piece of paper, encased in a protective sleeve. Christine's eyes fell on it, and for a split second, her breath caught. It was addressed to Cody. The handwriting did look like hers, disturbingly so. The message read, "I will destroy you if you don't cooperate, and give me what I'm asking for. You know what you did. This is your last warning." The courtroom hummed once more. This, Vance indicated, holding up the letter for the jury,
Was discovered in Mr. Brown's home office 2 days ago while conducting a routine inspection of personal items in this case. Christine's face heated up. That's not my letter. That's not my writing. It's a setup. Vance shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's proof that Mrs. Brown has been conducting a deliberate campaign to discredit and financially destroy my client.
Dana Mills advanced, whip-like voice. Your Honor, this is precisely the sort of 11th hour ambush the rules of evidence are meant to avert. We urge instant handwriting examination by an impartial expert before this is presented to the jury. The judge nodded thoughtfully. We'll take a 30-minute recess.
Bailiff, bring in both challenged documents and have them sent for preliminary examination. The intermission seemed to go on forever. Christine remained in the secluded section of the corridor, Dana by her side, both women thinking out every possible explanation. It's desperation, Dana grumbled. They know they're losing.
Christine nodded, but her head was reeling. Somebody had taken a lot of effort to make those papers, and only one person had both motive and opportunity to make it happen. She shot a glance down the end of the hall, where Robin sat talking softly to Cody, her hand on his arm. When the bailiff called them back in, Christine pushed herself to stand tall. The judge pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Preliminary examination. Is that the handwriting on the so-called threatening letter? Doesn't match Mrs. Brown's known exemplars.
And as to the emails, metadata indicates they were composed on a computer not owned by either Mrs. Brown or Mr. Hale. Dana permitted herself the smallest smile. Cody's jaw clenched, and for the first time all day, he appeared truly unsettled. The judge addressed the jury. These documents will not be introduced into evidence. You are to ignore them completely. But the respite was brief. Dana rose, her words crisp.
Your Honor, presently, we have further evidence to introduce. Evidence beyond fiscal impropriety. She grabbed a sealed evidence bag and held it aloft. There was the original letter from Cody to Christine, the one telling her to think of your kids. This, Dana explained, was faxed for expert forensic analysis last week. The results returned yesterday. Not only is it identical to Mr. Brown's signature, it also has his fingerprints and trace evidence of the same ink on the same color used in his home office. The jury visibly flinched. One man leaned back, crossing his arms, his gaze leveled at Cody. The judge turned toward the defense table. Mr. Vance? Vance's voice was strained. No other questions at this time, Your Honor. The room's dynamics had changed entirely. Christine leaned back in the witness stand, her expression serene but her heart racing. She knew they were almost there, almost to the point where years of silence and manipulation would be laid bare before the world. What she didn't realize was if the jury would be able to see Cody for who he was, or if his decades of charm and control would prove sufficient in winning him one final victory. The courtroom descended into an almost unbearable silence as the judge tapped his glasses. His gaze swept across the thick pile of papers in front of him. Cody's foot began to tap furiously beneath the table, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and desperation. Christine remained motionless, her hands folded together, her eyes fixed on the bench. Having considered the evidence and heard the testimony, the judge paused, his voice measured. This court finds Mr. Cody Brown did knowingly participate in fraudulent financial practices to hide assets both from the state and his family members.
A gasp echoed through the courtroom. Robin slapped her hand against her chest. Janelle closed her eyes as if exhaling years of anger. The cameras snapped wildly. The judge went on, in addition, Mrs. Christine Brown is officially cleared of all charges. The court acknowledges her as a reliable whistleblower who acted in the spirit of justice. Christine's lips quivered, but she didn't smile. This wasn't winning. It was finishing a chapter that had almost destroyed her. Cody leapt up, his voice cracking. It's a setup. She's lying. They all, Mr. Brown. The judge cut in abruptly. You will be silent or you will be held in contempt of court. Security guards edged closer. Cody's attorney reached out and put a hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to sit. The judge's last words were like a gavel ringing through everybody's head. Mr. Brown, you are directed to pay restitution to the plaintiffs, turn over all assets concealed, and you are never to manage any family trust or fund again. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Christine let out a breath, her body shaking with the release of years of anguish. As the courtroom cleared, Janelle stood beside her, tears brimming in her eyes. You did it, Christine. You finally did it. Christine glanced over at Cody, for the final time. Standing alone, surrounded by his vanquished legal team, his empire disintegrating before his eyes. And then, without a word, she turned and walked out of the courtroom into the blinding light. Free, exonerated, and ready to pen her next chapter, without him. But deep inside, Christine knew something that none of the others did. The papers she turned over today, they were only a portion of what she possessed. The rest, she stored away. For the time being. For in the Browns family, one revelation always begets another. And Christine wasn't finished.